Well, I'm walking my dog out in the park today, and it's a beautiful day here in, the suburbs of Grand Rapids. Yeah, a couple of other folks here, and I see a young couple riding their bike. One is riding their bike, and the other has a scooter. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about Northern Michigan media. The Detroit Tigers are kicking ass and taking some major names. The Tigers are number one team in all of baseball. They are like 8 games above anyone else right now. So what's going on is that I want to tell you something that was really disgusting that happened to me early last year. I was up in Northern Michigan. I was up in Williamsburg. And I was up north on the very first day, opening day in Detroit. And what happened was I was flipping through the radio dial to see if I could pick up the game. And I kind of knew that Traverse City didn't have a Tiger affiliate. So I thought the best bet was going to be 93.7 of Cadillac. I thought maybe they would have an okay signal in Traverse City. So here's the problem. I was driving out Williamsburg, heading towards Elk Rapids on Elk Lake Road. And it was 93.7 was fighting with 93.5 out of Boyne City, which of course is KLT. And what happened was the Tigers, so this is what happened. Here's the irony in all this. 93.5 at the time was playing Kid Rock. Not, Bow Went to Bow or Cowboy or the classics. Nope. They were playing some of the newer stuff. Which, by the way, royalty sucks. And I'm not, of course, my love of Kid Rock has really gone down the last couple of years due to his love of the Republicans. And how are you doing? Hey there.
How are you?
Good.
Beautiful day again.
It is. I just walked by a guy who was in a motorized scooter, by the way. Real nice guy, I've met him before. But anyway, I was upset. Why in the fucking hell was there no Tiger affiliate in Traverse City, of all places? People in Traverse City love the Tigers. So, this is a problem that's been going on and off for the last, I would say about 30, 35 years. So, for decades, the Tigers were on WTCM AM. Of course, back then it was AM 1400, and then they moved to 580 in the early 80s. And what happened was, for many years, WTCM AM simulcasted the FM 103.5. And they had monster ratings. So this is what happened. The AM was a non-factor and basically just a waste of electricity. So what they did was in 1991, WTCM added this new guy named Rush Limbaugh. And Rush, and it was a perfect fit. And the reason why was because, Rush Limbaugh, he's this right-wing tool who very self-centered, very racist, homophobic, says a bunch of idiotic things, kind of like most of the people in Northern Michigan, unfortunately. And Rush's ratings went through the roof. Meanwhile, the Tigers were a disaster. They were an abortion. At the time, they were owned by the founder of Domino's Pizza, Tom Monahan, and Tom had Bo Schembechler as his president for the Tigers. Bo personally fired Ernie Harwell. And people were pissed. Not only that, the Tigers were a last place team. And I would imagine that Tom would cry that, we won the World Series in '84 after I just bought the team. Yeah, he didn't build the team, folks. The team was built under the aegis of John Fetzer. He also was the owner during the '68 World Series run. And he was overall a really good owner. Great owner. But Monahan sucked. Now, so what happened was, word had it that people complained to WTCM. They wanted to hear Limbaugh over Tigers. Detroit Tigers, bad. Limbaugh, good. So what happened was TCM had to work around and create a contract with the Detroit Tigers organization to carry only a select games, only the night games pretty much. Day games were a no-no. So anyway, a few years afterward in '96, Ross Biederman, the owner of WTCM, purchased WCCW AM/FM. And at the time, 1310 was a daytime-only station that carried old people music like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Basically old people music. As a matter of fact, my grandparents loved 1310 AM. It was mostly a satellite-fed station. I visited WCCW not long after Biederman bought the station. He moved WTCM, not WTCM, but he moved WCCW from the Front Row Center building, which is, of course, owned by the Lagina family, which, of course, if you watch Curse of Oak Island on the History Channel, you understand who they are. Of course, the Front Row Center building, that was the old Michigan Theater, downtown Traverse City. Traverse City used to have 3 movie theaters, the Michigan, the State, and the Trabe. The Trabe shut down in the 50s. That became the U&I Lounge. And, of course, the State is still going strong, owned by Michael Moore and his group, Traverse City Film Festival. So what happened was Michael Moore, Ross Biederman, I get my names mixed up, don't I? He moves the station from the Front Row Center building and moves it to a building right next door to WTCM. As a matter of fact, the Biederman family owned both buildings for many years. I guess the other building, once upon a time, was his father Les's personal office, plus it was the home of Michigan, Midwestern Cablevision. Trixie, stay. I'm talking to my dog here. She wants to go around and walk around. But meanwhile, I have a podcast to do. So what happens is Biederman moves WCCW into this building. I visited WCCW not long after he bought the station. Dave Fortney was the night guy at the time. So the story was, Dave and I had a nice conversation about the business, and he taught me a lot. Really cool guy. He worked at WKLT back in the day. Of course, oddly enough, Midwestern now owns KLT. And he talked to me about why KLT sucks and yada, 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 basically. So I was not necessarily, I was a little bit shocked at the time. I was only in high school when I saw this. WCCW AM's equipment was not even in a room. Their studio was actually a bunch of, it was like an automation system in the hallway. It wasn't even a real studio. It was like a tiny mixer board and, a computer and a few other gadgets here and there, because the station was a full-time affiliate of ABC's Unforgettable Network. And, I mean, it was a daytime-only station at the time, 5,000 watts. As a matter of fact, WCCW's founder, was a Midwestern employee from way back in the day. John Anderson, I believe his name was. He was a former manager at WTCM back in the 50s, and I guess he also ran 7 and 4. So what happened was Biederman purchased WCCW AM because I think he wanted to turn it into a sports station and put all the Detroit teams on 1310. So it would be a win-win situation for Limbaugh fans and fans of whatever night show they had at the time. Of course, I remembered back in the late 90s, I think on WTCM AM, their night shows consisted of mostly shows that nobody really listened to, like Bruce Williams and Jim Bohannon. Of course, nowadays it's Mark Levine and Rich Valdez. There we go. Anyway, here's the rest of the story. So WTCM. So anyway, Biederman purchased 1310. He boosted the wattage to 15,000 watts, and he added night coverage, like 7,500 watts. He also boosted the wattage of WTCM AM too as well. And he really spent a lot of money improving the signals of both the AM stations. And it was a major advantage at the time, because radio was very competitive. And anyway, when the radio center was built, WCCW AM finally had a feasible studio, and settle down, Tricks. Yeah, there's somebody walking by, and my dog has to talk to him. So the good news was the Tigers, Pistons, Red Wings, and I think even the Lions now had a full-time sports station, because WCCW became an affiliate of ESPN in 2000. And of course, by the time my grandparents actually moved to Florida, then they actually spent their summers in Detroit with my uncle. My grandfather died in 2001, and my grandmother stayed in the Detroit region. She moved into a old folks home and stayed there for most of the next 2 decades until she passed away. Anyway, so the rest of the story was WCCW. They had the Tigers. So I guess the story was even though WCCW had night coverage now, the signal was very highly directional and very sloppy. So WCCW FM had to pick up some games. Picked up the night games. And that was the arrangement for many years. So the rest of the story was not only that, 1310 had to move their transmission facilities. So what happened was, of course, they built the baseball stadium, and they told Biederman and Midwestern, yep, you gotta move. So the FCC approved the move to WCCW FM site, but since Biederman didn't want to spend a crap ton of money on a new, he spent $400,000 improving 1310. But now since they had to move again, I guess the FCC approved that they could stay at 15,000 watts, but nighttime coverage, because there were several other 1310s around, there was a 1310 in Wisconsin and there's a 1310 in Detroit, they had to go off the air at night. They were back to being the daytimer, and of course, they also got rid of ESPN. That moved to the FM at 106.7 and 105.5. And then what happened was WCCW anyway, along the way, of course, 1310, they stopped doing sports. They actually tried oldies, for a while, 50s, 60s oldies, while WCCW FM focused mostly on 70s. That didn't last long, and then they went back to ESPN when Midwest, when Northern Broadcast and KLT and the Fox and ESPN up north all ceased to be. Of course, they bought out KLT. So what happened was WCCW, they actually lost the Tigers. So this is what happened. A lot of shit happened in Northern Michigan radio in the late 2010s, especially with Northern Broadcasting, the Goki family. They had to get out of the broadcast. They wanted to get out of the broadcasting business because their stations were not making good money. And what happened was, the only cash cow they had was KLT, and that was it. The Fox's ratings were shitty, and ESPN wasn't that great either. So, if they didn't make one bad decision, it was another. So they tried to sell their stations to the Coyne family, Stone Broadcasting, Q100, and which is Q100 and Up North Sports 101.1. So what happened was the Coynes, of course, the deal did not go through. So the Coynes ended up working a deal with Roy Henderson and his radio empire. And so what happened was they were programming WLDR. They put Q100 on 99.3, and they put the sports station at 92.3. So now WCCW no longer had the Tigers. For the first time ever, Midwestern Broadcasting no longer had the Tigers. It was all on 92.3 or 101.1, depending on what part of Northern Michigan you were at. And 92.3, didn't really have much of a signal east of Traverse City anyway. It was 50,000 watts. And of course, it led to another problem so what happened was Roy Henderson had issues keeping people. And everybody who knew Roy knew that he was the biggest asshole in broadcasting. He did not take care of his employees, and he didn't take care of his stations. And sometime in the 2010s, 99.3's transmitter went kaput. So what happened was, of course, 92.3 and 99.3 were off the air for years at a time, and people did complain to the FCC about Henderson. And what they did, this is what happened. Henderson responded by lying to the FCC by saying, well, we are on the air because we are a full-time simulcaster, WLDR, and WLDR carries, and WLDR isn't a full-time affiliate of the AC radio network from Westwood One. My dog's talking to me, by the way. So anyway, what happened was WLDR. So anyway, they lied by saying, this is what advertisements that was carried at the time. So Henderson saved his ass by lying to the FCC. So the rest of the story was that so what happened was Henderson apparently stopped paying his taxes, and he had tax issues with one of his properties in Texas, and so because of the financial problems he was having, and not only that, he had so I guess sometime in the late 2010s, Roy had a heart attack. and was forced to have heart bypass surgery. So what happened was Roy knew that he had to give the day-to-day operations of the stations to somebody else. So he gave it to he worked out a deal with the Coins to lease the signals. And so what happened was Henderson leased out WLDR 92.3 and 99.3 to the Coins. Well, like I said, 99.3 didn't have a signal into Traverse City. They were only broadcasting a few hundred watts, apparently. So, and they knew it was a direct violation of the contract. So this is what happens. This is what happens. The Coins decide to move 99.3's they put a booster for 99.3 on WLDR's tower. So what happens is this is what happens. WLDR, so they purchased WLDR's transmission site from Roy Henderson. And the reason why was because Roy lost it due to taxes. So they bought it in a sheriff sale. So they worked out a deal with Henderson to lease out his stations to help him financially. Well, so anyway, when 99.3 was illegally put on WLDR stick, which was 40 miles from Frankfurt, the FCC responded. So this is what happened. So Northern Michigan has another 99.3 way over in Alpena, which is, surprise, surprise, owned by the Biedermans. And that's WATZ, a very popular country music station. So what happened was the engineer at WATZ, and allegedly Trish McDowell Garber, who owns KHQ and Light 96 and Bob FM and the aforementioned 93.7 WKAD in Cadillac, they all complained to the FCC and said, legally, they can't do that. Legally, the Coins, Henderson can't do that. So because Henderson's the owner, he is responsible for the property. So this is what happens. Henderson was fined $20,000 by the FCC. And what happened was Henderson, when he got slapped with that fine, so this is what happens.
Have a nice day, guys.
You too. So what happens is Henderson pulls the plug on the deal between him and the Coins, and they were off the air for a weekend. So this is what the Coins do. They knew that they were screwed, so they found another broadcasting company in Northern Michigan that was having also some difficulties, and that was News, which controlled WJML and up in Petoskey, and a bunch of repeater stations all throughout Northern Michigan. So the story was, these stations were owned by a guy named John Yob, who is a right-wing dildo. John tried to put together a right-wing talk network in Northern Michigan, and it didn't make money. He bought a bunch of stations, and they weren't making a dime. So this is what happens. The new deal was that the Coins turned the AM stations, WJML, 1110 AM in Petoskey, and 1210 AM, WJNL in Kingsley, plus their translator in Traverse City at 101.1. to the sports stations. So they were all sports stations, and they all became the new de facto home of the Tigers in Traverse City. And at the time, because the local games were locally on 101.1, yeah, the signal once again was a little spotty throughout northern Michigan. Once you got out of Traverse City, 101.1, if you drove east, you could probably pick up the 101.1 out of Grayling, which, also carried the Tigers. So anyway, the long story short was, and of course the FMs that they had, well, for a while, two of the FMs were North FM, which was the continuation of WLDR's format. But then they flipped it to a Q100 simulcast. So things were kind of cool and groovy for a while. And then what happened was, in 2022, Yob pulled the plug on the deal. Now, I heard a rumor that a lot of it had to do with money. But at the same time, Yob was saying, yeah, I want to sell my stations. So now, I guess he already sold 1110 WJML in Petoskey. That's now a Christian station. And it now has different call sign because he moved the WJML call letters to 106.3 in Thompsonville, which is outside Traverse City. So what happened was all these stations right now during the daytime carry a satellite-fed country music format called Wine Country Radio. There's no website for Wine Country Radio, or, and it's their format during the day, and at night it's Grateful Dead Radio. And apparently it's just a placeholder format until Yob sells the stations. He already sold 94.5 in Mackinac City. That's now a classic hit station called The Bridge. Yeah, WSBX is the new call sign. I know that one for Whiskey Sours Broadcasting, because the guy who owns it is named Billy Sours. So what happened, so here's the rest of the story. So now, because the coins are back down to Q100 and up north sports 101.1, that meant that somebody in Traverse City could have picked up the Tigers and the Red Wings and maybe even the Pistons. And nobody has bothered. Nobody. Trish McDonald Garber probably cries that, well, people in Traverse City can pick up 93.7. But like I said, once you get north of Traverse City, they do a little fight with 93.5. And then there's, of course, there's Black Diamond, which has, the Bear, Rock 105 and 95.5, Big Country 102.9. They actually picked up the Lions. So thankfully the Lions have a home in Traverse City. But here's what's depressing. The Bear has been a ratings dud for years. It's so funny that 25 years ago, the Bear was kicking ass and taking names because Bob and Tom was a hit morning show, and KLT was having an identity crisis because, the Zone finally started playing some kick-ass rock instead of the Little Fair crap, soccer mom crap. And then what happened was, so the story was, part of the reason why the Bear started to sputter in the ratings is because Bob and Tom decided, yeah, we're going to clean it up because of the Janet Jackson scandal. So that's what happened. They decided to sell their soul to Clear Channel. And what's funny is that they don't even work for Clear Channel anymore, because Westward One, they switched networks, so it's now through Westward One. So, I don't understand why the Bear still exists. They should pick up the Tigers. Seriously, they need to pick up the Tigers and the other Detroit teams, and maybe switch it to a sports format. I don't know. I mean, hell, I don't even think the Bears DJs are even local. Yeah, my dog even. Yeah, my dog agrees, by the way, with everything that I have to say. So, the rest of the story is the bear. But and the big problem I see too is Midwestern. Midwestern's general manager is a guy by the name of Chris Warren. Chris Warren is the stepson of Ross Biederman, the owner of WTCM. And I guess the story was Biederman's kids didn't want the station, the company. So Chris and Ross always had a wonderful relationship. And so now Ross is, he's pretty much all but retired these days. I mean, the guy's 85 years old. So Chris, who is in his 50s, he's running the joint now, and I even saw a picture of him with his son, and I guess he's trying to pass the station down to his son. So 4 generations of, Biederman and Warren family ownership. So the rest of the story is he was the only radio manager who was interviewed by the Record Eagle when they did this story a few weeks ago. And his response was, every time we air a Tiger game, everyone complains. And I'm like, okay, I understand. The Tigers sucked for years, but now they're kicking ass. And yet they think that people would rather listen to a dingleberry like Mark Levine, who, in my honest opinion, is just another Jewish guy who takes the side of Hitler, instead of airing something that people on both sides of the political aisle can agree on, and that's the Tigers. But you know what, all I can say is, thank God for satellite radio, which I have Sirius, and of course the fact that many radio stations do stream the game. But to me, it's a slap in the face to the broadcasters of Traverse City. And look, when I started Chuck69.com in 1999, I complained that how bad it was. And people agreed with me. I mean, in the last 26 years, so many radio stations in northern Michigan didn't get it. And what happened was they all switched format. They all switched owners and switched format. B94.3 was in 92.5 was a dud, and so was the Fox towards the end. And now that station's gone. 92.5 is actually off the air because the transmitter collapsed. It was actually a Christian station now. And of course, 94.3 in Traverse City is now CMU Public Radio. 106.7 is now a country station after years of really bad formats like UFM and WSRT. Soft rock and great talk. Music for old yentas who drink a lot of wine and watch the kids play soccer. Ay vey. And disclaimer, I'm not Jewish. And then you got, but yeah, it's like one of the last times I was in Traverse City. It's like I hit the seek button. Every other fucking station in town was a Christian station. And there was this one station called 104.1 The Answer. Or whatever the fuck they're called. And let me tell you what happened. I put it on this god-awful station for a few minutes. Or the Source, excuse me. Number one, yeah, I remember it's now called it's the Source. And they on my RDS readout in my car, they misspelled the Source. S-O-R-C-E. Yeah. And I'll tell you what happened. They aired some show where some nasty old lady was screaming and yelling, "The Democrat Party is destroying America and destroying our morals." And I'm like, so this is what the type of audience that Northern Michigan Radio is going after now. the worst common denominator, period, in the story. You know, and not only that, back to Chris Warren. Chris, I hope, gets the Arbitron ratings, Nielsen ratings for Northern Michigan. I hope he does. Because he needs to know that 1310 has no ratings. And WCCW's ratings have gone way down since they bought KLT. And it's like, I know 1310 can't air night games anymore. They can air the day games. But when it comes to the night games, well, they have a guy, they do have a night guy, Ron Pritchard, and he's kind of Mr. Reliable at that station. He can do and it's like, and they don't do night games all the time either. And I don't know why, I don't know if he wants to board op the games or not. Because, yeah, you would have to have a board op and all that good stuff. Maybe he'd rather play music instead. I don't know. But, I was a friend of Ron's on Facebook up until maybe a year or two ago. And Ron, of course, he made headlines because his son had this very rare lung disorder that caused him to have he had a lung disorder. He had holes in his lungs. He was in an incubator, very special incubator, and he died because he was going to have a very expensive lung surgery and lung replacement surgery. They did a GoFundMe, and they only raised $20,000. They were asking for $25,000. And folks, what I'm about to say will piss off a few of you off, but I'll say it anyway. It's karma. Because Ron posted some of the dumbest and shittiest things on Facebook I ever read in my life. And one of them was the fact that he was attacking the victims of the school shooting in Florida, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. They all stepped in and said, enough is enough with guns. And what does Ron do? So this is what happens. David Hogg, he stepped up and said he personally attacked Laura Ingraham because of the fact that she attacked them. So what does he do? He goes after her sponsors. And what's depressing was the only advertiser who refused to pull the spots from her shitty-ass little show was the My Pillow guy. And now I'm hearing that he's having major issues because nobody's buying his shit anymore because everybody knows that My Pillow is a scam product. It's snake oil. And Ron, on the other hand, he goes to Facebook and cries, Laura Ingraham almost died of breast cancer. You should be ashamed of yourself. It's like, dude, I don't give a fuck if she has brain cancer or AIDS or any other disease. The point of the matter is, you need to, now that your son's gone, you should know the pain of losing a child. I hope, but you know what? I don't think people like Ron are ever going to change. And you know what? If he wants to go ahead, and let's remember something. At the time this was going on, guess what his job was? Guess where he worked? Z93. And his ratings were rock bottom. Z93 was close to the bottom of the rate. They were last place in the ratings. And I heard a rumor that on his morning show, he would spew a bunch of stuff that attacked people like Joe Biden. It's like, dude, your audience is made up of teenagers. No wonder why Z93, got rid of him. Not only got rid of him, and, he moved over to CCW. Good place for him. Either that or WTCM, 580, where he can spew his vitriol against, victims of mass shootings and, true leftists. He even attacked Bernie Sanders. But you see, that's, I'll tell you something. If Northern Michigan Radio wants to throw their listeners away, be my guest. They threw me away in the late. And it's like, I asked myself, are they going to, and it's not just Northern Michigan, it's everywhere. Even here in Grand Rapids. I know. I hear you. Yeah, this is what happens when you own a dog that's part Schnauzer. But that's the way it is, folks. Northern Michigan Radio is what it is. And it's not just Northern Michigan Radio, but Grand Rapids too. Grand Rapids, KLQ did a good job of throwing people like me away. And of course, GRD tried to bring me to them. And, they did a good job for a little bit, but look at GRD now. Free Beer and Hot Wings is a shadow of their former selves. And even though GRD, they do an okay job of playing newer rock, but it's like you also have to sit through 70s butt rock to get to it. And Rock 105 and 95.5. Okay, let me explain. First of all, I'm happy that Traverse City does have an active rock station. Okay? And of course, the Zone was an okay station too. However, number one, the biggest problem, I give them a lot, I love the fact that they play a lot of 90s and 2000s rock. A lot of stuff that I enjoyed growing up. And when, KLT wouldn't play it. KLT would never play bands like Korn or Rage Against the Machine or Tool, even Metallica was spat on by KLT because they were so boring. They wanted to play all the crappy butt rock that, that bag of losers would listen to. However, the big problem that Rock 105 and 955 currently has, number one, they don't play enough new rock. It's like every time I go to I check out their playlist online, it's like for every 7 songs or so, 7, 8, 9 songs, only one song is a newer song. And a lot of times I go back to their site and it's like, it's the same new songs. It's like they only play like 5 new songs. And it's, the new Linkin, it's like, I'm off the top of my head, the new Linkin Park, which I hate with a passion. I hate what they did to Chester Bennington, and the new girl Emily Armstrong is a whack job. Oh, the new 3 Days Grace, they play that. They play Ghost's most recent hit. But I noticed that Emergence by Sleep Theory, they're absent. I actually like that song. And of course they have that sax solo at the end. That song's the number 1 song on active rock radio, and it looks like Rock 105 and 955 turned it down for some reason. And they do that a lot. It's like, what the fuck is... But then again, I also have to realize... And not only that, I noticed that they are playing the new single from the Black Keys, which active rock radio has already turned down. And for good reason. The Black Keys, their fame has dwindled tremendously since, their latest album came out, and it turned out to be they were supposed to play in a bunch of arenas, and they had to cancel the tour because nobody's going out and buying their albums. It's like, but then again, last time I checked, the Rock 105 and 955, they're mid-pack in the ratings again. And I think part of the problem too is Cartman. And Cartman, I think I told you the story a couple of times. Cartman and I haven't spoken to each other in years. I mean, he's became a friend of mine on MySpace, and then he posted a picture of himself urinating on KHQ's van. Cartman cried to me that it was photoshopped. You shouldn't have reposted that on the Buzzboard, and everyone on some idiot on the Buzzboard claimed that I was the one that made that photo. And it led to me having a kind of a mass exodus of people who like me on that message board. And the real truth was, it was like, this is why I don't trust radio people. I'm sorry. And it's like, right now, as I'm talking, the only person I can think of that I still get along with in the world of broadcasting is Darren Gibson, who works at M106.3 up in Greenville. And Darren, by the way, here's the fun fact about M106.3. Guess who else also works there? Dave Fortney. That's right, the guy I mentioned earlier who worked at KLT and CCW. But another problem Rock 105 and 955 has, their DJs are fucking old. It's like, not only that, it's like the only female DJ they have who is, the midday jock on Rock 105 and 955. Damn it, now I forgot her name. But she's like 90 freaking years old. What the hell, man? Dave Doran is 90 years old too. It's like, what? And Carlini, there we go. And I understand, one of the guys who owns Rock 105 and 955, one of the Black Diamond guys, he was a long-time employee of WRAF. But, it is what it is. And anyway. But, I shouldn't have some people will cry, well, you don't have room to bitch, Chuck, because you live in Grand Rapids now. You don't live up there. I know. But, it's not just radio that's a problem, but the other big news story in northern Michigan right now is 9 and 10. Okay, so 9 and 10 is now broadcasting full-time from Traverse City. They abandoned Cadillac. 9 and 10 used to broadcast, so the story was, the studio they have in Traverse City is the fourth studio they've had. Most there's a lot of TV stations out there that are still broadcasting from the same building and have been for like 75 years now. Now the story with Channel 9 and 10 in northern Michigan, their first studio burnt to the ground. The second studio was built in 1962, and it was their home until 2018. And the reason why they moved, so what happened was in 2018, they moved to a new building off of 131 in Cadillac. And it was the old Kaiser Industrial Building. And this new building, some people joke, looked like a mausoleum. And they said it was a really big building for a TV station. And it was a nice building. It was 22,000 square feet. So why did they move? The reason why was because the old building was very outdated, and another problem was so the other big problem was they were underneath the station's Channel 9's tower, and ice would build up during the wintertime, and if it melted, it fell onto people's cars, and there were some people who were very close to getting whapped with ice, and as they were rushing out to their cars in the parking lot. Thank God I never worked there. Plus, it was also in the middle of nowhere, too. It was actually just outside of a town called Tustin, a couple miles away from that, and then there was a town called Dighton. So, anyway, they moved into this new building, and then what happened was they came to the realization that it was too much money to run. It was too expensive to run, and they were paying a lot of money in taxes. They were paying, upkeep. And then not only that, the family that owns 9 and 10, the Iacobellis, they were spending a lot of money on other business projects, like they purchased Traverse the magazine, mynorth.com, and they were also starting up this little farm called Nambop Farms, and Nambop, by the way, was named after the nickname that Pete Iacobelli's children called their grandparents Nana and Boppy. Nambop. So, anyway, so they moved into this brand new studio in Traverse City, and it's getting a lot of mixed reactions because it's a really tiny studio. It's like moving from a mansion to a small townhouse. And meanwhile, 9 and 10 sold that building to the Wexford, I think it's Osceola County Intermediate District. They're kind of basic. I guess it's still going to be a TV studio, and they're going to teach kids how to be broadcasters and yada yada yada. So I guess they're. So anyway, what happened was they sold it for a little bit over $2 million. So they'll make some good cash from that. Probably to recoup some of the bad. I don't know how much debt they have. They're a private company. So. But here's what happened. Some people like to talk about 9 and 10 versus 7 and 4. And some people like to say that 7 and 4, is the worst of the two evils because 7 and 4 is owned by the Sinclair Media Group, which is known for its ultra right-wing bias. But, I want to tell you a few things about 9 and 10. Number one of the reasons why I started Chuck69.com in 1999 was because they had dropped 9 and 10 used to air Howard Stern's Saturday Night Show. But they dropped the show. But here's the story. They dropped Howard Stern's Saturday Night Show, and they never really gave out a reason why. So what happened was, one thing I did notice was the lack of advertising. It was mostly PSAs and promos for syndicated shows and stuff like that. So what happened was 9 and 10, a lot of TV stations were also dropping the Stern Show too. And some stations dropped it for Baywatch, others for Walker, Texas Ranger. 9 and 10 dropped the Saturday Night Stern Show for infomercials, and one of them was from Charlton Heston and the NRA. It was just after Columbine, and 9 and 10 traded Howard Stern for more right-wing garbage. And, and I'll tell you something, man. I am so happy Michael Moore exposed Charlton Heston for who he really is, or was, in Bowling for Columbine. And the reason why, especially that really heart-wrenching scene when... So what happened was Charlton Heston, Michael went to Charlton's house. He does an interview with him, and Charlton had the audacity to walk away from Michael Moore when he showed him a picture of a little girl who was shot and killed by a 5-year-old boy. And I get, he walked away, and it shows how heartless that he really was. And what's even more depressing is, in northern Michigan, in the town of St. Helen, there is a charter school named after him. And every time I hear about the Charlton Heston Academy in St. Helen, the one person, it's like naming a synagogue after Adolf Hitler. So, anyway... But anyway, of course, the only good thing I can tell you was that 9 and 10 at least carried the Stern Show. No station here in Grand Rapids carried Stern. Nobody. then what happened was, a couple of years later, 9 and 10 got on my call again, because a few short years after, so the story was, a few short years after 9/11, about 5 years after 9/11, CBS decided to air a 9/11 special, a documentary. And what happened was 9/10 refused to air it. And the excuse was that, well, it contained too much profanity. Oh, too much profanity. We can't air this garbage. And they claimed that they were going to be fined $10 million if they aired it. I can understand. I remember now, in the 90s, 7 and 4 aired Schindler's List, because it was part of the NBC network at the time. And NBC chose to show it uncensored because they really wanted to show who Oscar Schindler was. And it contained a lot of profanity, some nudity. Of course, there was a scene where a bunch of naked women are in a shower totally naked, and bush ass and pussy, bush ass and boobs. So what happened was, some idiot wrote a nastygram to the FCC, and they gave 7 and 4 a notice of apparent liability, but then they dismissed it by claiming it's not even an indecent movie because it's educational. And in 9 and 10 wasn't going to take the, they claimed, well, we're not going to take the risk. Let me tell you what else happened in 2006. Dick DeVos was running for governor, and he was spending buku bucks on political ads left and right. And Dick DeVos wanted, I would imagine, so the 9/11 special did not have any advertising at all, none. It was advertising free. And then what happened was 9 and 10. I think the reason why was because they wanted to sell advertising, and it was a political year. And what happened was 9 and 10 decided, okay, let's sell our souls to Dick DeVos. That's what they're in other candidates. Although somebody did tell me that they did watch the alternate programming, which, by the way, was it was a Robin Williams movie. I remember now. And I think it was called The Best of Times. And it was not one of his best movies. And what happened was, Dick DeVos, now allegedly there was no advertising. Hardly any advertising. It was all promos. But that's the way I look at 9 and 10. Or anybody in the broadcasting business. They say one thing and do another. But another thing they did too was they also took control of Fox 32. Well, or back then it was Fox 33. They bought it from Rockfleet Broadcasting. And Rockfleet was this company out of New York City. They purchased Fox 33 from the founder, Gary Knapp. And at the end of the day, Gary sold Fox 33 to Rockfleet. Rockfleet actually made headlines because they owned the ABC affiliate in Bangor, Maine. And nobody, so what happened was, there was a mass exodus one evening. All the newscasters left. So what happened was, Rockfleet was kind of a crappy company anyway. So what happened was 9 and 10 purchased Fox 33. And of course, since they legally couldn't do that on their own because of FCC rules and regulations, they decided, so this is what they did. They found a friend from, so Mario Iacobelli, whatever the hell his name is pronounced. He had a friend in Arizona named Alex Balea, and Alex bought the station for him, and Mario paid him to operate the station. So it was a shared services agreement. And 7 and 4 did the same thing with 29 and 8 when it was owned by Barrington Broadcasting. And of course, then it moved on to Sinclair. And a company that the Smith family, which started Sinclair, owns, called Cunningham Broadcasting. So the rest of the story was that, so now 9 and 10 and Fox 32 are in the same building. They moved it to 32 because of the digital switchover. So anyway, what happened was Fox, so that was part of the reason why they moved into that big-ass building in Cadillac. Although the new building in Traverse City is just a sliver of the size of the one in Cadillac. It's like a townhouse. And so what happened was Fox 30, so anyway, but here's something else to think about. You know, I know 29 and 8, ABC 29 and 8 and Fox 32 didn't have much of a news department to begin with when they were owned separately. So what happened was, but the problem is that 7 and 4 and 9 and 10 have always been mano a mano against each other when it comes to the news ratings and so forth. So what's going on is that 7 and 4 and 9 and 10 are now duking it out against each other, and now 7 and 4 is owned by Sinclair, which is a conservative company. But now 9 and 10, some people are like, well, 9 and 10 is the better station because they're more liberal. And I've already given you a few examples about how they're not really all that liberal. They screwed over Howard Stern, and they screwed over, you know, people who wanted to watch a 9/11 documentary because it's all about the money to them. And over the years, people have come and gone from 9 and 10. And as of late, they've had trouble keeping people working there. So the story is, so this is what happened. A few years ago, 9 and 10 hired a new woman to co-anchor the 6 o'clock news named Christina Ahio. Christina is, and the story with Christina is she's a Hispanic girl, and she came into 9 and 10. She was from Texas, and she was there for a few months. So her story was that, so Christina's story was that she came to 9 and 10 from Texas. And unfortunately, the reason why she moved all the way from Michigan to Texas, from Texas to Michigan, excuse me. Sorry, my dog's a little anxious. She wants to go, but I have a few more things to say, and then I'll wrap it up. Anyway, the story was, the story was the reason why she came to northern Michigan, she came in from El Paso, Texas. She came in because she got fired in El Paso because there was a scandal. So the story was, she worked at the NBC affiliate in El Paso, KTSM, Channel 9, which is owned by Nexstar. She worked there. So she worked at KTSM. She was one of the main news anchors there. And she did a news story where she interviewed the embattled Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. And it was nothing more than a kiss-ass interview. She's called him so the story was, she simply called Ken Paxton a good family man. And what was depressing was that Ken Paxton cheated on his wife. and even hired his mistress, to help run his office. It's like, dude, what the F? Family man? Jeez. You gotta love Republicans. And not only that, the many scandals he's having, and plus the fact that he banned porn sites from, like Pornhub from Texas. Jeez. Yeah, porn is bad, but guns are good. Thank God I don't live in Texas. And then what happened was this dingo. So this is what happened. In the interview, Ken is talking about how Ken and Christina talk about how wonderful and brilliant his plans are to keep migrants out of Texas, and Biden's plans are bad, and God. So anyway, this is what happens. Christina, so the story was the state so I guess it was a U.S. representative serving the El Paso area. She was a Democrat. Democrat. She wrote an angry letter to Nexstar Broadcasting and KTSM and asked to have Christina fired. And they did. They fired her sorry ass. It was also discovered that Christina was posting a lot of shit on Twitter. Yeah, we don't call it X around here because of what what's his face did to it. Yeah, Elon. And the story is, she was like, so yeah, that's what happened. She was posting stuff like, the pandemic is, it's COVID isn't real. God damn these people. She even hosted a show on a very far right-wing network called Real America's Voice. And I guess Ted Nugent hosts a show on there, of all people. How appropriate. So, anyway, that's what happened. So, anyway, she got fired from KTSL. I guess she has tried to sue them. But, I don't know whatever really happened with Web's, with the situation or not. Sorry for the interruption. My dog has a mind of her own, unfortunately. But you see, here's what happened. Christina Ohio ended up in Cadillac at Newsnet, which it was, of course, that little TV network, news network that was founded by a guy named Eric Watilla. And then he made the mistake of selling most of it to this Indian guy, the guy who created 5-Hour Energy Drink. He tried to turn it into another Fox News or MSNBC or CNN, and it didn't do well. It was a financial disaster, and they closed. So, and now, so anyway, she worked there for a little bit. I don't know if she was fired or but I know she went to 910 afterward. And after 910, so anyway, part of the reason why she left 910 was because she decided to go back to Texas. And now she works for the Salem News Network. Yeah, Salem, the same company that has a lot of far right-wing nut jobs. And they say, oh, we're a Christian company. Yeah. Then why do you spread lies? Yeah, let's remember something. They're the company that produced the movie 2,000 Mules with Dinesh D'Souza, the convicted felon. And they were actually sued because one of the guys, they made this foolish claim that all these people who were putting in ballots in ballot boxes were all fake. Oh, it's all votes for Biden. They couldn't even prove shit. And it was all fake. Yeah, it was basically, I love it when people cry that Michael Moore is a fakester. That's not true. Michael Moore is real. And so what happened was, Salem actually had to take the movie off of streaming because somebody actually tried to sue them for defaming him because they claimed, that he was a part of this left-wing organization, that tried to get Biden elected. It wasn't true. Not only that, I believe he also claimed that he was a Trump supporter. Dinesh D'Souza, what a big pile of shit he is. Anyway, good spot for her. And I hope that she will rot there. But anyway, after Christina Ohio left, 9 and 10, like I said, they kept paying the price. They came to the realization that mausoleum was too big and too expensive to run. And, another thing I heard was that they were upset that CBS wanted a lot of money to renew their contract. So that's part of the reason why they severely downsized from the mausoleum to that studio in Traverse City. They wanted to put their foot and realized it was a lot easier to buy for advertisers in Traverse City than the advertisers in Cadillac, the little tractor dealerships and I would imagine that Ebels has a good budget too. Yeah, they're everywhere. They even advertise here in Grand Rapids. But anyway, long story short, I actually watched some video of their newscasts from the Traverse City studio. And I've seen pictures of their new studio. It is tiny. Very tiny. The room only consists of a few cameras and a giant monitor. I would say the monitor is 10 feet tall. And there's another monitor that's like a basic, I want to say, 85-inch monitor that they use for like a secondary. And I'm like, okay, sucks to be you, 910. It sucks to be you, Northern Michigan media. Why can't you do shit right? I know a lot of people in Northern Michigan are a bunch of right-wing dingleberries, and I'm sorry that I had to grow up there. If people up north were a lot nicer and not as backstabbing and not as, not with a lot of skeletons in their closet and all that shit, I'd be happier to be a Northern Michigander, even though, there's some good things I can say. My hometown of Elk Rapids now has a radio station, 99.7 Village Radio. They signed on the air a few weeks ago. I'm waiting for them to start streaming online so I can check it out. I helped to support the station's sign-on by buying a T-shirt, so you can help. You can help. Thank me to help get them on the air. But yeah, I'm just. All I can say is, I know, television-wise, it's what, 113. I believe Traverse City is now a bigger market than Lansing. And then there's, but the radio side, needs a lot of work. But, all I can say is thank God for the internet. Thank God for podcasting. Thank God for satellite radio. I mean, I'd rather listen to Howard, even though his show isn't as good as it once was. I will agree with a lot of people. I mean, Howard Stern still has better parts than Freebird and Hot Wings or Bob and Tom or any of these crappy wannabe morning shows. And, there's all, look at, I know I mentioned them a few times, the Midas Touch. I love those guys. Great show. If you ever wanted to check them out, do a search for Midas Touch, MEIDAS, Midas Touch. Listen to them. That's all, and that's what it is. Thank God for the internet, because terrestrial radio, corporate television, they don't listen to you. They don't give a shit. And it's not just big media companies like iHeartMedia, Clear Channel, or Cumulus, but even the smaller guy has problems. And I'm happy to say that karma will hit them hard on the ass. It already hit Roy Henderson. I would imagine that Trish McDonald-Garber is going to lose a lot of money from having two of her transmitters collapse during the ice storm recently. And I've heard a lot of really bad stories about her, and her dad was a union buster. But that's what it is, folks. I can't stand the media, traditional media. And of course, you look at what happened with ABC News recently. Look at what happened. I like so many other people, am upset that ABC fired Terry Moran just because he trashed Trump on Twitter. Are we allowed to have an opinion anymore? Are we allowed to have the First Amendment on our side? Years ago, Roy Henderson sent me a cease and desist telling me don't ever talk about me or my stations ever again. What he was really doing was he was like Donald Trump, or Drumpf as we call it here at ChuckCCN.com. He is like Drumpf. You talk smack about him, oh, I'm going to sue you. You don't have, oh, you're lying, you're slandering me. No, I'm not. The building in Cadillac that 910 had sold for just over $2 million. Henderson wanted $5 million for that fucking hole in the ground at the corner of Front and Park in downtown Traverse City. And he sold it for $2 million. And honestly enough, that's the way it is, folks. Media companies don't care about me or you. It's about the almighty dollar. It's not because, let's remember something, folks. The news media was originally set up to lose money, but it was a requirement by the FCC. But things changed when the Fairness Doctrine was eliminated by Reagan in 1987, I believe. And that's why we ended up with Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, and while people like Tom Hartman are relegated to podcasts. And yeah, I'll never get it. So I'm just saying, folks, that as long as I have a voice, but look at what happened to Henderson. Excuse me. I got off track a little bit. Look at what happened to Roy Henderson. He, two of his radio stations in northern Michigan have had their licenses revoked. And because they were off the air for too long. And WLDR is supposed to be broadcast at 100,000 watts. But guess what? He doesn't want to work with the coins anymore. They still own the transmitter site. And guess what? There's, it's only, it can't make a profit just running off of 800 watts off of a tiny little stick off of West Bay. See? You say shit and you get hit. And that's all I have to say about that. The First Amendment will win every time. All right, folks, I got to get going. Talk to you later.